Talktainment Radio, worldwide sound. Talktainmentradio.com. We give you a reason to come. The world's greatest radio. We give you a reason to stay. Radio, the way it should be heard. You got the power.
The views and opinions expressed are those of the host and guest and not necessarily those of TalkTainmentRadio.com, the management, the staff, or K&E World Network, LLC.
This is The Compensatory Concept with Mr. Neely Fuller, heard exclusively on TalkTainmentRadio.com, the world's greatest radio. Radio, the way it should be heard. And now, Mr. Neely Fuller.
If you do not understand white supremacy, which is racism, what it is and how it works, everything else that you understand will only confuse you. Only confuse you. Only confuse you.
This is The Compensatory Concept with Mr. Neely Fuller Jr., heard exclusively on TalkTainmentRadio.com, radio, the way it should be heard. I'm Brother Kahari, sitting in every week with Mr. Fuller, and you can get us at www.talktainmentradio.com. Talktainment is spelled TalkTainment. Now, our phone number is 1-877-932-9766. 1-877-932-9766. Now, you can pick up Mr. Fuller's works at www.producejustice.com. That's one word, producejustice.com. And let me bring in Mr. Fuller now. Mr. Fuller, how are you, sir?
I'm still learning.
All right. Mr. Fuller, we've got a lot to get to, but I want to open up with any thoughts that you may have of anything that has come to you throughout the past week or so since we talked. I guess last time since we talked was Saturday, but since we talked on this show, is there anything that you want to put down or talk about? Mr. Fuller.
Well, just briefly, I'd like to touch on the situation in the Middle East. What to say about it, and I always try to repeat that the so-called Middle East is an artificial political product specifically designed to be none other than a cauldron of indefinite intrigue, misery, murder, and confusion that is of serious benefit to no one except the system of white supremacy. And that's the way I usually say that people should always address it, just right off the top. Just say it's a situation. It's not really a geographical location as such. It's an ideology, something called the Middle East, something that someone dreamed up. And all of the evidence shows that it's something that's specifically designed to just go on and on and on and on and on until, presumably, the people who believe in white supremacy want it to stop, in which they don't want it to stop because they're the ones who set it up, presumably. They're the usual suspects when something like this is going on, primarily because it involves a lot of people who, many people, not all, but many people who could be classified as non-white. And it sometimes includes places like so-called Yemen or even Morocco, which there's a lot of dark-skinned people there, Libya, a lot of dark-skinned people there, anywhere where there are people, a lot of people who are of color, and which is sort of a crossroads. That might even include Ethiopia. Sometimes they will call that a part of the Middle East, even though, you look at a so-called map and you see that it's in Africa, and they'll say, well, Africa sometimes is a part of the Middle East, and sometimes it's not. Depends on which Thursday it happens to be that the white supremacists make a decision about how many people they're going to kill or how many people they're going to have on the move. So this is the way I am advocating that everyone looks at it at all times. It's just a concoction by the white supremacists that's designed to cause a lot of intrigue and a lot of experiments. some new type of aircraft, a new type of weapon, or some type of gas that somebody's going to use and whatnot. Run it past those people over there in the Middle East who have dark skins. Now, a lot of them don't. A lot of them are classified as white. All right? But these are what, in the code vernacular, the counter-racist code, are called white sacrifices. In other words, they're throwaway people in order to run the business a lot smoother. The white supremacists have shown all throughout their history that they don't mind sacrificing either small numbers and sometimes very huge numbers of white people. White sacrifices is what you might call them, for the sake of the greater strength of the system of white supremacy. Case in point, the so-called Civil War, even though there's no such thing as any war that's civil. Civilized war, and that's a contradiction. Makes no sense at all. But they had one big one in this area of the world that they called the Civil War, the war between the states, sometimes called. But it was about what? It was about what do you do about these dark-skinned people? And so, just like people in the organized crime, which is white supremacy is an organized criminal organization, they go back and forth every now and then about how they're going to handle the dark-skinned people, and sometimes it gets out of hand, and they actually come to blows, and sometimes they actually start slaughtering each other. But after it's all over, they shake hands and say, okay, all right, I see your point of view. Your point of view is different from mine, so we'll go with your point of view until we decide to change it again. But I'm sorry about that we had to come to blows about that. But this is serious business. This business of white supremacy is serious business, and sometimes even brothers in the system of white supremacy will turn on each other about how we're going to handle these dark-skinned people. And we'll have these kind of blowouts every now and then. Just like in organized crime, they'll say, we got to, like Pete Clemenza in Godfather 1, said every now and then we got to do a little of this. I mean, it cleans out the bad blood.
Right.
Every 10, 15 years we got to do it, Michael. And when it's all over, we shake hands, and make some kind of deal. Mm-hmm. So it's the same kind of operation. This is the image that I want people to have all over the world in their minds about this so-called Middle East mess. And stop worrying about it, because the white supremacists will keep it going as long as they feel like it's to their benefit. And they have felt that it's to their benefit for a very, very long time.
Okay, Mr. Fuller, if we had to ID white supremacists, because I know we've used that term on this show many, many times, who is a white supremacist? What is the evidence of their work? How would we know if someone is practicing white supremacy? And I'm not talking about just in a general statement, Mr. Fuller. I'm talking about specific evidence. If you had to go to court, because you've always said we must present the evidence like we're in a court. If you were going to a court to present evidence that white supremacists exist in XYZ, what kind of evidence would you need to present to validate the existence of a white supremacist or white supremacy? Mr. Fuller.
The evidence that I would use are the 9 areas of activity of the people of this planet: economics, education, entertainment, labor, law, politics, religion, sex, and war. And then I would say, now where's the evidence of white supremacy in all of these areas? Well, just go around and look. I always tell people, don't believe anything Neely Fuller or anybody else says about race, racism, or counter-racism. Take a detailed look for yourself and see in economics, starting with the first area of activity. I call it the 9 areas of activity. These are labels that I gave it some years ago. Economics, the use of time and energy, and the sources of money which is a part of economics. Who controls it all worldwide? Is it white people or non-white people? Is it all white people or just some white people? Well, when you say all white people, you're talking about a whole bunch of people. So, if you say, well, is it all white people? You say, no, I can't say that, because you don't know all white people, or there's no evidence. I mean, you look at babies, they're white. You look at old people in wheelchairs, some of them, many of them, millions of them are white. I mean, and in hospitals, who have Alzheimer's, are they white supremacists? Logically speaking, the answer is no. But then who are these racist suspects? Because that's what you call them. You never call anybody a racist. You always say, I suspect that Mr. Jones or Mr. Smith or Mr. Snyder, he could be or may not be a racist. But never call a white person a racist in the system of white supremacy, because you really can't prove it. Talking about court now, there's no way to prove the existence of racism, except through whom? The racists themselves. They are the only ones who can prove that racism even exists. Why? Because the evidence shows that they're in control of everything, including how things are going to be judged, including racism, and how many races that there are going to be. Races of people, R-A-C-E-S.
Now, Mr. Fuller, what specific, I'm like the judge now, what specific evidence, you said 9 areas, that's general, but what specific evidence, Mr. Fuller, would you put on the table that documents the existence of this white supremacy?
Well, let's go and look at it like this. Say if Neely Fuller was going out to look for a job today, would I go looking for a job among some black people in the Northwestern Hemisphere? Not likely. If I'm really serious about making some serious money, I'm not going looking for any black people for a job. I'm not going in. There'll be black people in offices now, because you have these black faces up front, which is what the white supremacists engineered in the last 20 or 30 years or so. Put the black faces up front. That'll be the first thing, and that's your first hurdle, by the way, because the black face is put there for a reason, by the white supremacists, presumably, and that is to keep you from getting a job. That's what he's been assigned to tell you. Otherwise, he won't have a job, he or she. See, now, if you don't turn these people down for these jobs, I'd let you know that you can hire the quota that we have. We're going to hire 300 people here today. Now, you and I, we understand that only out of the 300, we only hire 10 black people. That's just the way it's got to be. Because we believe in diversity, and we'll have a smattering of Hispanics. And anybody else, you call me and check with me before you hire them. But definitely it'll be 10 out of the 300 we're going to hire today. And so the black person might say, well, wait a minute, how did you just come to that conclusion? I came to that conclusion. Now, do you want this job or don't you? And most black people on the planet know that that's how it works. They experience this all the time, okay? And they'll sit there and they'll have to take the heat, because someone will come in and sit there and say that I have these credentials and I finished this school and I finished this college and all like that. Now, this is a black person talking to another black person. And so Miss Jones, who is black, she sits there and says, well, that's all well and good. Well, I'll get back to you, And so when the person gets back to them, say, well, I've been getting a runaround here for about 2 months now, so you haven't been giving me any information and all like that. And they'll say, well, look, I have to follow the guidelines. That's usually the term that you get. I have to follow the guidelines. Now, where do the guidelines come from? It'll come from somebody white. Anytime you start talking about anything, now I just gave this that little illustration. That's just what you call the everyday illustration. But in everything, if you're talking about economics anywhere in the world, if I start talking about how much oil is going to be drilled in the Gulf of Mexico, I'm going to be talking to somebody white. I'm not going to be talking to somebody black, unless that somebody black if I question them often enough and in depth enough, they will say, well, I have to go and check with Mr. Smith. And sure enough, when we go across the derrick and go to that office, Mr. Smith most likely will be somebody white. And this is in every area of activity. In education, whom do the black people of this entire planet go to learn something that's worth knowing? It's going to be somebody white. That's the second area of activity. I mean, for about 50 years now, black people have been trying to say, we need to educate our children. Our children are not getting educated. I mean, you know, we don't have enough graduate people, people coming out of graduating from college or from grade school, and we got too many dropouts. And what can we do? What can we do? What can we do? Are we going to have segregated schools here in this city? Are we going to get resegregated? Are we going to bring back busing because the white people are now moving out of this area? You know, well, the white people are moving out. What's they have to do with education? They say, well, when the white people move out, we don't get an education. Well, why is it you black people don't get an education when the white people move out? Well, because they take everything with them. Everything like what? Did they take the desk? Did they take the blackboard? Did they take the books? Did they take the pencils? No. Well, what did they take? Well, they took themselves. Well, what, you know, so they took themselves out of the neighborhood. And so there's no more white people around. And so the black schools are left to be all black schools. That's what you call them. And so the white people left. But they left the school. The building is still there. There used to be one-room schools. So what are you talking about? The computers are still there. So what did they actually take? Well, they took themselves. Well, what has that got to do with anything? Well, when they took themselves, they took the brain power. That's the one thing we don't want to talk about. Come on now. See, that's white supremacy. Meaning, you only learn when they are there. That's what that means. It can't mean anything else. And why is that? Is because evidently either black people are inferior, that's what we have to face up to, or white people who are white supremacists, presumably, withhold constructive information when they teach. When they teach dark-skinned people, they withhold constructive information. And they got all kinds of ways of doing that, even when they are the ones doing the teaching, because they teach around the subjects that are really important.
Well, Mr. Fuller, is there an argument that can be made that black people are inferior?
Sure.
And what argument would that be?
You just flat out say that black people are genetically inferior. But here's what the code says. For years, when people bring this up, I go right to the jugular on it, like I try to do on all issues dealing with race. I say, suppose black people, all of the black people on the planet, without exception, or even the majority, you might say, are just inferior people, genetically inferior. I mean, their brains just don't work. That's just all it is to it. Suppose that is the case. What do you do on this planet with a huge number of inferior people, people who have the label? Everybody's done the research and agreed. These people are just flat out inferior. They just ain't got it. I don't care what you do with them. I mean, they just don't have it. Now, that's a question. What do you do with people like this? You practice justice. You do the same thing with inferior people that you do with superior people, or any people in between. You practice justice, meaning you guarantee that no one is mistreated, and you guarantee that the person that needs help the most gets the most constructive help. The solution is still the same if you believe in humanity. Now, if you don't believe in humanity, you just merely stop playing around and start an extermination program. and stop trying to kid people. Now, I have come to the conclusion that the white supremacists really don't believe that black people are inferior. And starting with some indication of that was that back in what we call so-called formal slavery in the Northwestern Hemisphere, they would always try to get rid of a slave who was curious. Curiosity is the first step toward learning. That slave that's always peeping over the master's shoulder trying to read his books. People like Phyllis Wheatley, people like Booker T. Washington, people like Frederick Douglass. I mean, always trying to find out things. A curious slave is dangerous. A slave that's always trying to learn something. See, no one comes in on this planet knowing much of anything. They have to be told by people who are already here. That's how most so-called education is done for the average person. Every now and then, even in a family of 10, you'll have one person who's a little smarter than the other, a little quick-witted, you might say. They might, Agnes there or Camina. I mean, she might be in a family of 10 black people. And everybody else is kind of slow, including the mother and father. But Camina just runs all over the place, can figure out stuff real quick. She does all the other children's homework. We know that. This is the nature of the universe. But see, the white supremacists, the way they operate, when they start teaching dark-skinned people, they just teach you what they want you to know. That's where the danger is when they start moving. Or if you insist that they hang around and do the teaching, they start curtailing what they tell you. They withhold information. Any white person that withholds constructive information to a black person is, by definition, a white supremacist. I want to say that right now.
Yeah, say that again.
Any white person anywhere on the planet that withholds constructive information to any non-white person, any time of day or night, withholds constructive information, got some constructive information, but withholds it. Just don't tell them. Just don't tell them. That person, by definition, on that one thing, is a white supremacist.
Now, Mr. Fuller.
Boom, just like that.
Now, Mr. Fuller, you said
that label fits and it sticks.
Well, hold on, Mr. Fuller.
Yes,
you
sir.
said constructive information.
Yes.
Now, that, because you've laid out something there that's very, very defining. So now we've got to say, what does the term constructive information mean? Give me a definition.
Anything that when you use that information, it has a constructive effect. That's the only criteria. That the person that information is given to, and I'll give you a case in point.
Okay.
A young fella who was talking to me once, and we were talking about race, and I said, well, white people know a whole lot of things. They're the smartest, and the white supremacists among them are the smartest and most powerful people on the planet. Now, he wanted to argue about that and all like that. I said, well, you don't have to listen to me on it. I mean, just see who you go to when you need some real constructive information or some information that will help you. So he turned me down on that. I mean, at the time, the person I was talking to, he said, oh, I don't believe that, and whatnot. But he thought he had put it to a test. So one day, and this is what he told me later, maybe about a year later when I ran across him, he said, you know what, you remember when you told me that white people know a whole lot of things, even when it seemed like they don't? And I said, yeah, because they're even, white people that you consider to be not very knowledgeable, they're in touch with other white people who are knowledgeable. I said, so they have information. So I said, so anytime they start talking and willing to give you some constructive information, you listen. Don't turn it down. And so he said, well, I tried that. He said, you know what? By me doing that with a guy that I work with, we were just having a conversation, And I started asking him things, and he saved me $2,000 right off the bat. Because it was something I was fixing to do. I was fixing to lose $2,000, and he saved me $2,000. I said, well, things like that. That's what I'm talking about, practical things. I said, now, you're supposed to be getting this information all the time. Why is it that you didn't have this information before? And he said, that's a good question. I said, it sure is. I said, somebody told him that,
That's a
but they didn't tell you.
That's a very interesting standard. Now, is that the only standard by which we determine if someone is a white supremacist?
No, it's a long list of things in all areas of activity. Okay. Another one is, not only does a white person not withhold constructive information, I'm saying every white person that doesn't want to be a racist should just seek out a black person to give some constructive information to. That's the procedure for doing that. And the other criteria, and this is a real important one, because white supremacy is founded on deception, okay? So they got to get rid of the lies, which means no white person should ever say something willfully and deliberately to a non-white person that is not true. That automatically labels you a white supremacist right there. Boom, right out of the gate.
Say that again, Mr. Fuller.
No white person, or rather any white person, that says something, deliberately says anything to a non-white person that is not true, is automatically a white supremacist. Automatically. And that label sticks with that white person until white supremacy no longer exists. You never shake that. You just tell one lie, it's over. You got that label now. You got that label. You are definitely a white supremacist.
They can never reform?
You don't know when they are reforming until the system of white supremacy is over. That's the criteria. It's not a harsh criteria. It's business. White supremacy is a business. You've got to approach it on business principles. That one lie.
Wow.
That's all it takes.
So, not sharing constructive information.
Yes, not sharing constructive information, that dooms you right there.
And then
you got the white supremacist label right there.
Okay, and then telling willful, deliberate lies.
Yes.
Knowing that you're lying to someone.
I mean, that white teacher in that classroom, tells that lie, that one lie to one class. That's a white supremacist teacher from now on until the system of white supremacy worldwide is ended. That label sticks. You can't shake that label. So you have to be careful about what you say. It's really important because you're influencing somebody's mind. You have misled a non-white person. And look at what happened to the people that we call Indians behind somebody misleading them. Signing treaties and whatnot. Telling lies. Telling one lie right behind another. President Obama's correct in going around trying to make a survey. That's about all they're going to let him do. Of the damage has been done to whole groups of people who call themselves Cherokees and Choctaws and Apaches and Sioux and Iroquois. And where are they now? A bunch of people out on some so-called reservations with no resources, in trailers and whatnot, committing suicide, getting drunk, eating up with diabetes, and the only thing the white supremacists have to offer them, well, we'll let a few of you all have a few gambling casinos. They're not factories. They don't produce anything. These used to be called vices.
That's right.
That's all you're going to give a whole people for everything that you took?
Wow.
Are you kidding?
Stay right there, Mr. Fuller. This is deep. We're going to plunge even deeper into what are the standards for determining who a white supremacist is. You don't want to miss this. Stay right there. More to come. This is the Compensatory Concept with Mr. Neely Fuller on TalkTainmentRadio.com.
Would it be crazy if you packed your bags and left? Peace Corps. Life is calling. How far will you go? To find out more, call 1-800-424-8580 or visit peacecorps.gov.
TalkTainmentRadio.com is the premier internet radio platform offering 40-plus talk radio-style programs professionally produced, optimized for online distribution, featuring Columbus, Ohio on-air personalities. TalkTainmentRadio.com offers listeners diverse programming options covering topics such as arts and culture, love, life and relationships, technology, religion, paranormal activities, local and national politics, women's issues, alongside health and wellness. Listeners can access their favorite TalkTainmentRadio.com programs free of cost through the website. Download the TTR app to your cell phone and you can take us wherever you go. We have programs on demand to fit your schedule through our podcast. The address is TalkTainmentRadio.com.
Have you ever wished you could spend more time with your kids, or maybe quality time with your spouse, when you can actually have an uninterrupted conversation? Do you owe your dad a little catch-up time? Well, it's time to reconnect, and no activity can bond a family together quite like boating and fishing. I mean, think of all the great experiences you had as a kid when you went boating or fishing. Well, guess what? It's still great. Boating and fishing are the perfect opportunities for your family to get away, to talk, to laugh, to create new memories. So take someone you love out on the water and see where the water takes you. If you haven't been on the water in a while and you're not sure where to start, or if you just like to have some helpful tips for your next trip, please visit TakeMeFishing.org. This has been a public service of TalkTainmentRadio.com. Radio, the way it should be heard.
The United Independent Compensatory Code System concept by Neely Fuller is considered as one of the substantial and basic books for understanding and effectively countering racism. Neely Fuller will turn upside down everything you've heard and everything you think you know about racism and how it works. Call area code 202-484-5461. 202-484-5461.
Are there hidden sex words that impact your brain? Are there secret images and symbols that manipulate and control your child's mind and behavior? Why are so many youth unable to resist the destructive sexual messages beamed into their brain without them knowing they are being manipulated? Do you want answers? Get the new book, Sex Code War by Kahari and Ahara, coming soon.
I think I'm entitled. You want answers. I want the truth. You can't handle the truth.
You got the power.
This is the Compensatory Concept with Mr. Neely Fuller Jr., heard exclusively on TalkTainmentRadio.com. Radio, the way it should be heard. I'm Brother Kahari, sitting in with Mr. Fuller every week. If you want to get Mr. Fuller's works, he's got two definitive works. I mean, incredible works. And you can get them at www.producejustice.com. You can just type in producejustice.com, actually. And it'll come up. You look at the prompts, and it's two works and other information that might be there. And then you follow the prompts, and then you'll be able to order Mr. Fuller's works. Also, you can catch Mr. Fuller today. We're live right now at 10 a.m. Eastern Standard Time. And then we have a replay on Talktainment Radio at 3 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. And then another replay at 10 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. Or you could go to TalkTainmentRadio.com, click on Programs, search out Compensatory Concept, go to Wednesdays. That's the best way to do it. And then look for Compensatory Concept, and then click it on. And then voila, you've got all of the podcasts. And then whatever show you want to hear, follow those podcast prompts and hit play. And then there you go. You can listen 24/7 on TalkTainmentRadio.com. Mr. Fuller, we have a caller, and I want to give a caller a chance before we go back to those standards for how to identify white supremacists. This is extremely, extremely illuminating. Okay, caller, you're on the air with Mr. Neely Fuller. Go ahead.
My question is, as a non-white person, are there other sources of constructive information for me other than white people?
Very good question. Mr. Fuller?
Well, people are classified, according to the white supremacists, as white and non-white. So, therefore, all of your information has come from the people who are on the planet who are classified. So anybody who can tell you anything that is constructive, I mean, you just try to learn it. We're supposed to be in a learning mode. Black people have been kind of taught indirectly by the white supremacists to turn down learning. It's best for a black person not to learn anything that is of any value. They are willing to teach you anything that's silly and stupid, anything that will help you to be sillier than we already are, or stupid. But anything that's going to be of constructive value, they actually have trained black people to almost laugh at it, to have contempt for it, to run away from it, don't want to even be bothered with it. They back in the day, as they say, they used to call it being square, and some of the younger people, I understand, in some of the schools and whatnot, they call it acting white. If it sounds like you're trying to learn anything that has any sense to it, they call it acting white. How did it get that label?
Yeah, which is interesting.
Because it means getting things done.
Right.
Right. Including, I mean, all the people out here say, I don't have time for that. I got to get me some money, and I got to get me some bling bling. Well, now, those people who act white, particularly the white people who are acting white, are the ones who provide the bling bling, and the ones who provide the money, and the airplanes, and the submarines, and the guns that you shoot to kill each other. They are the ones who provide it. Acting white, duh. The most powerful people in the world. You better believe they're acting white because they are white.
People say, oh, you want to be too serious. Why are you so serious? It's like, because there's a need to be serious about serious things.
Yes, well, that's what you have to keep reminding people. See, black people have been trained to be serious about things that are silly and to be silly about things that are serious. And we more or less enjoy that. But it's not really our fault. We've been raised that way. That's the way our minds work.
Mr. Fuller, is that what you call the Negro mind? You mentioned that last week, which was quite a compelling
term.
Yes,
you can have different labels on it, but I mean, really, it's just worshiping of stupidity. That's basically all it is. If you just want to say it in plain old Georgia back road terms, I mean, country terms. I mean, some elderly black person sitting on the back porch back in 1932, they would just listen to you and listen to you and listen to you. And because they're farm-type people, and farm-type people, sometimes people don't even want to talk to them because they're so practical. Because you better be practical if you're out there trying to deal with nature. Tornadoes and raising spinach and cotton and whatnot, you better be real. You can't fake that. So that's why sometimes in the old days, there's not a lot of them left around now, but a lot of country people could see through things that city people couldn't see through. I mean, and you talk to them, they sitting there on that back porch watching the train go by in the late afternoon. That's the only entertainment they had. And you ask them a question, or you sit there and start talking about what you did in the city and all like that. And they will tell you in a minute sometime, say, you know what you sitting here doing, boy, is just talking a whole lot of foolishness to me. I don't want to hear no more of it. Now, I got to go feed my chickens. And he'd get up and go. He doesn't even want to talk to you. See, because our minds have been full of junk for many, many years, and the white supremacists just keep loading us up with junk. And we worship junk, and it comes out in our behavior. even when we interact with each other. We've practically gotten to the place, many of us, where we can't even stand ourselves. Not to say about standing other people. We can't hardly stand to be with ourselves. We're so full of junk. And I don't mean something like drugs. I mean our minds are just full of trash and junk. Everything that everybody's throwing away, I mean, this winds up in our heads. And so the white supremacists like it that way. Because, and they'll finance it too. I mean, the more stupid you act, the crazier you act, the more things you come up with that don't make sense. Get another tattoo. Yes, I'm going to say it. Get another tattoo. All right, and then next week come around. Hey, you don't have enough tattoos. I mean, don't you think you should have a tattoo of your cousin's face? On your other arm. Well, yeah, that's a good idea. My cousin. I like my cousin. Put his face on my other arm. Okay, you got any space left on your body for anything else now? Okay, what about putting, let's put a gun back here. I mean, on the back of your calf. How about that? Yeah.
That's deep studying the understanding what's been put into our minds. First caller, stay right there. Let me go to my second caller. I want both of you on the line at the same time. Let me go to my second caller. Caller, the one who hadn't spoken, just came on. Go ahead, bro. Let me hear from you.
Yes, Mr. Fuller, you said that if a white teacher teaches that Columbus discovered America, she is exhibiting white supremacy, right? Now,
yeah.
Right. Okay. Now,
if that's not true,
huh?
If that's not true,
that's not true. So
I said. If wait a minute. If that's not true, and it turns out to be a lie, then that person, you can't call them a racist because there's no way to prove it. But you say you suspect that they are racist. That's the way you want to get in the habit of doing it. Racist suspect.
Now, President Clinton stood up and made an apology for slavery, but wouldn't declare any reparations. Our leaders set up and said, basically said nothing to this effect. Okay, now, you say that there is no buffer between white supremacists and our people. You said one week that, you hear people speak of this boule, and that, if I don't think that they exist. I haven't seen any proof of this, of the existence of this organization. And what I'm saying is that there is a buffer. I'm saying that there is a buffer between white supremacists and black people or Africans, to keep them in line and in check. And isn't this an illustration of this buffer with this whole reparations thing or anything that can benefit African people over here in America is shot down or not traveled on, or that path is not, or that road is not taken.
Mm-hmm. Mr. Fuller.
So what I'm asking, so specifically, Dr. Neely Fuller, I'm asking you: does this buffer between the African people and white supremacists with African people who take handouts from these white supremacists? Do you accept that? Do you accept that there is this organization?
Okay, you talking about, does he accept that the Boule exists as a buffer organization? Is that right, between white people and black people?
Sir.
Okay, Mr. Fuller.
Yes, sir. Not white people, not black people, African people.
Right. Okay, Mr. Fuller.
My answer is I don't know. I have heard that there is, but the question I always ask myself, what do you do about it? And so the answer that I gave myself because everything that I write is addressed to the individual, so I'm an individual. And so when people ask me what I think, I give them my individual evaluation. They can have their own. That's another thing. That's the magic of the code. I mean, people don't have to agree. They just go with what their own analysis, their own logic tells them. The logic that I go with is I don't concern myself with what's that so-called boule. Every black person is a buffer or can be made a buffer instantly if the white supremacist determines that he or she is going to be a buffer, because they have the power to do so. There were buffers on the plantation. I mean, and they weren't driving around in fancy cars, anything like that, but there were, like in the movie Gone with the Wind, the movie started off with a lesson that you can instantly learn, that I can instantly learn, rather, I already knew it, and that is, two black people were working in the field, and one of them looked up and said, "Quitting time," and the other one says, "Who says it's quitting time?" "I'm the foreman. I was the ones that says quitting time." And so then he says, "Quitting time." And that's after the other black person that said quitting time. Now, you look at those two black people out there in the field in the hot sun, one of them saying quitting time, the other one saying quitting time, and the other one telling them, one telling the other, "You're not the one that's supposed to say quitting time. I'm the one supposed to say quitting time," and neither one of them are running anything. And that's a lesson in the movie Gone with the Wind, made in 1939. Now, that says it all. That says it all about that buffer thing. It's something you don't have to worry about, because let's say, for instance, if there is 2,000 or 3,000 buffers and you exterminate them, the white supremacists will just make 4,000 more the next day. Now, that's something that you learn in Godfather 1 and 2. Failure to learn that means you don't understand white supremacy and how powerful it is. They can make them faster than you can break them. They can make them faster than you can ever break them. I'm going to say it again. They can make them faster than you can ever break them. See, and many black people will like to argue with another black person about how to solve the system of white supremacy. One thing, I'm not saying that you're doing that, but that is a tendency. That's a tendency of most people, to always try to find the weakest thing in any structure. So it's easy for me as a black person at the bottom of the slave ship to accuse the other black person who's been given extra cornbread of being the problem.
Right.
And I don't choose to do that.
Right. And you know what I'm saying? That was my next thing. That was the illustration that you used. But and then you know what I'm saying? And then you say, well, they can make them faster than you can take them down. And I agree with you on that. I agree with you wholeheartedly on that. Right. But I want to be aware, or are you aware? Are you cognitively aware of this buffer, this existence of this buffer class, and the extent?
How do you
uphold and promote?
Right.
Promote white supremacy.
How do you define buffer class? Give me a definition of what you mean by that term.
Well, I mean, actually, the boule. This buffer class is. I'm seeing it so much in radio and television. For instance, we have described Kahari say, well, the president can write legislation to help black people. The president has helped other organizations, other groups of people. Mm-hmm. Why can't he help African people? And there's systems put in place, radio announcers and so forth, that have shows on that defend the president unequivocally with said no backlash against anything that he does.
Right.
So these people in doing this, right, are part of, they call themselves Greeks, black Greeks, right, and other organizations. They don't readily put out the name of it or so forth, but these organizations exist. And,
Okay.
and they have existed all the way back into the days of W.E.B. Du Bois.
Right. Mr. Fuller, do you believe what he's saying? Do you believe there's such a thing as a buffer class?
No, really. I mean, it's just a label. It's just a label of a black person who's been given some more privileges. I'm looking for more privileges. I don't know of a black person out here who isn't looking for more privileges, who isn't looking for more than what they already have. So you can call every black person on the planet a potential buffer if that black person gets more tomorrow than they had today out of the system of white supremacy. Because somebody's going to look at them and say, looks like you're doing all right. I'm not doing all right. Why is it you're doing all right? And I ain't doing all right. So therefore, you are a buffer between me and the people who are oppressing me. What I want to say is the bottom line about this whole bufferism business. You got to deal directly with the white supremacists. That's what Michael Corleone knew in The Godfather 1. He says, we're out here fooling with gunslingers and whatnot. He says, we'll be doing that forever. He said, I'm not going to keep arguing with people like Mo Green and the rest of these people and the Tatalias. He says, Tatalia's a pimp. All right? Look at the movie The Godfather, because the structure of the system of white supremacy is based on that movie. Or rather, the movie is based on the structure of white supremacy. If you want to put it in that context, then I do. Because it's the whole history, the modern history of the Roman Empire in a small context, which is also about white supremacy, because white supremacy is based on that model. So if you're dealing with, you just want to go around, being angry about buffers and all like that, it is my analysis, and I'm going to say this flat out, all you'll do is wind up driving yourself crazy, because there's no solution to that without going at the white supremacists directly. And that's what I tell people in a practical sense on a job, because I have black people who call me, and they'll tell me, well, we can't talk to the head man because they got all these black people in between us and the head man, and we can never get to the head man. And I simply tell them, you're going to have to. Because they say, well, if we could just get rid of this black person that's in between us and the man, then everything will be all right. I say, who do you think put the black person there? The black person was put there to keep you all out of the office. You got to find out a way to get to the office if you're going to get to where the problem really is. Ask for a meeting. Ask for a meeting with the person who runs the place. That way you don't have to go through all of this. And don't take no for an answer as far as that. And use, particularly in the Northwestern Hemisphere, tell them you have a constitutional issue, because that's the only thing that I recommend that people use. Fifth and 14th Amendment. I say you have a constitutional issue right there on the job, and you want to take it up with the person who has all of the power. Nobody in between. Because it's a constitutional issue, and the Constitution is supposed to be the law of the land, particularly the 5th and the 14th Amendment. 5th Amendment is due process. Everybody going through doing everything the way that ought to be done, according to law. And the 14th Amendment, the one that Thurgood Marshall used and lots of other people, equal protection of the law. Because usually most problems on a job is about people not doing things the way that they ought to be doing, going through the process. And the second one, 14th Amendment, You're not treating everybody the same. So you always say we have a constitutional issue here. And I'm asking, I'm not accusing anybody of anything. That's a mistake. Don't ever accuse anybody of anything on these jobs out here now, because you've got to prove your accusation. And you're going to have a hard time doing that, if not impossible to do it, in a system of racism. So what you do is say you're asking for an inquiry, asking for an investigation. You're not accusing anybody of anything, but you have reason to believe that the Constitution may have been violated. 5th and 14th Amendment, just those two. Nothing else. That's all you need.
Okay.
Just those two.
Mr. Fuller, we've got a caller who has a second question for you. Go ahead, caller.
My second question is, because I noticed when I listened to you speak, Mr. Fuller, you have talked about emotion and how we as non-white people have been encouraged to just be very emotional and not regulate our emotions. But what can you advise for non-white people to, as a way of beginning to learn how to regulate our emotions when they need to be regulated in these different situations, especially when we're trying to do constructive things and we have to interact with racist suspects?
Mr. Fuller.
Yes. Emotions, sometimes people think that I'm telling people not to be emotional. No, I'm not saying that. Emotions are part of the universe. Emotions are part of a person's being. But emotions are supposed to lead you to logic. The white supremacists have done a reverse job on black people by saying you use logic and your logic will govern your emotions. That's backwards. Your emotions are supposed to lead you to logic. Your emotions are nothing but an engine, like an engine, like putting gasoline in an engine. Your body is an engine, so your body has emotions. But the emotions, all of your emotions, and including all your physical body, your emotions and your physical body is supposed to lead to what? To your brain. Your brain is the most important part of the body. A lot of people say, well, the heart is the most important part. Well, the heart is a pump. But everything in your body is supposed to give life to your brain. And your brain is supposed to be a logical powerhouse, which means, what do I mean by logic? Your brain is a problem solver. That's what it's for. And if your brain is not in the business of solving problems, your brain is being misused. Because 24/7, your brain is supposed to be a powerhouse for solving one problem right after another. And your body is, and your emotions and everything is supposed to help drive your brain. That's the equation. And that way we'll become the universal people that we ought to be. I just want to say this before I forget it, too. It's something I thought of. The structure of a house. The structure of a house or an apartment, whatnot, has what you call in it a living room. In some of the bigger houses, the mansions, they have what they call the great room. Now, traditionally, what are these rooms used for? They're places where you just go and sit most of the time. That's what people do. They have sofas, they have chairs, you go there and sit. And most times they have the television in the great room or the quote-unquote living room. I'm saying what this room really should be for black people. We should start calling them ingenuity rooms. Ingenuity rooms. Now, what is an ingenuity room? Well, the typical dictionary says, what is the word ingenuity?
Mr. Fuller, we've run up against the clock on this one.
Oh, okay, we've run up against the clock.
Yeah, but I appreciate it. Thank you so much, Mr. Fuller.
Yes, sir. Thank
Okay.
you.
All right, then.
Sure.
Mm-hmm.
Right.